The porcelain cup slipped from Rose's hands, shattering on the dark wooden floor of the Westminster Café. The silence that followed was more deafening than the crash itself, and all eyes turned to the young maid who had just spilled hot tea onto the skirts of one of the establishment's most distinguished patrons. "Forgive me, Lady Hartwell." Rose dropped to her knees, ignoring the shards that cut her palm as she tried to gather the fragments. Blood mingled with the dark liquid spreading across the floor. "I didn't mean to." "Clumsy creature." The wealthy woman's sharp voice cut through the air. "My skirts came from Paris. I demand to speak with the proprietor immediately." Rose kept her head bowed, feeling tears sting her eyes. That job was all she had. Without it, there would be no way to pay for the wretched room she shared with 3 other girls, nor to send any amount to her younger sister in the countryside. "It was my fault." The childish voice came from a nearby table, delicate as the chime of a bell. Rose lifted her eyes and saw a girl no more than 8 years old, dressed in a navy blue velvet outfit that would cost an entire year's wages of her labor. Blonde curls fell in perfect ringlets over her shoulders, and her blue eyes were fixed on an indefinite point ahead. "Lily, do not interfere," said a man seated beside the child. His voice was deep, controlled, but there was a weariness in it that weighed like lead. Rose vaguely recognized him from the social pages of the newspapers that sometimes lined the tables. Jonathan Pierce, one of London's wealthiest men, owner of merchant fleets that sailed to the Indies. "But Papa, I asked her to come quickly. I was trying to count how many steps she took to our table." The girl turned her face towards her father's voice, and it was then that Rose realized. Her eyes, though beautiful, focused on nothing. The little one was blind. Lady Hartwell huffed, clearly displeased with the interruption, but she wouldn't dare contradict Jonathan Pierce's daughter. With one last withering glance at Rose, the woman withdrew in an indignant rustle of wet skirts. Rose remained on her knees, still holding the sharp shards in her trembling hands. The cafe owner, Mr. Whitmore, approached hastily, his round face red with embarrassment. "Mr. Pierce, 1,000 apologies for the inconvenience caused by this negligent employee. She will be punished appropriately. Your lordship may rest assured of that." "That won't be necessary." Jonathan Pierce took some gold coins from his pocket and placed them on the table, an amount sufficient to buy the entire stock of the cafe. "For Lady Hartwell's inconvenience and for our tea, keep the change." He stood up, and Rose could finally see him completely. Tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fine fabric of his grey coat, Jonathan Pierce was perhaps in his early 30s. His face would have been considered attractive were it not for the expression of perpetual melancholy he carried, as if an invisible weight constantly pressed down on his shoulders. Dark brown hair was perfectly combed, and a small scar cut across his left eyebrow, the only imperfection in an otherwise flawless appearance. "Come, Lily, we've had our tea." "But Papa—" The girl hesitated, turning her head as if she could sense Rose still kneeling there. "The young woman is bleeding. I can hear her quietly crying." Jonathan stopped, and for the first time his eyes met Rose's. They were a deep brown, almost black in the cafe's dim light, and contained a sadness so vast that Rose felt her own heart clench. "Miss, your hands require attention," he said, his voice losing some of its formal stiffness. "Mr. Whitmore, see that they are properly bandaged." Before Rose could reply, Lily released her father's hand and took 3 cautious steps towards Rose's voice, her arms extended forward. "Lily!" Jonathan moved quickly, but the girl had already found Rose, her small fingers gently touching the young woman's shoulder. "What is your name?" Lily asked, and there was such sincerity in her voice that Rose couldn't suppress a smile even through her tears. "Rose, my little lady. My name is Rose." "Like the flower?" The girl's eyes brightened with something Rose recognized as genuine joy. "Papa reads to me about roses. They're red, aren't they?" "Some are. Others can be white, pink, even yellow." Rose momentarily forgot her position, the blood on her hands, Mr. Whitmore's severity as he watched everything with disapproval. "Each has a different scent. The red ones are the most intense, like warm velvet in the sun. The white ones are delicate, like the first day of spring." "Warm velvet," Lily repeated, awestruck. No one has ever explained it to me like that. Everyone always just says red or pretty, but that means nothing to me. Jonathan remained motionless, observing the exchange. Something in his chest, long dormant, began to stir. It had been 3 years since Lily lost her sight due to a violent fever. 3 years since his wife, unable to bear their daughter's imperfection, abandoned them to live in Italy with a lover. 3 years in which he had watched his little girl retreat further and further into a world of silence and solitude, treated by everyone with a pity that made her feel less than human. But there, kneeling on the dirty floor of a modest cafe, that young maid spoke with Lily as if she were any other child. There was no pity in her voice nor discomfort, only a natural kindness that seemed to emanate from her very being. Roses have thorns, don't they? Lily continued, her small hand still resting on the young woman's shoulder. Yes, they do, to protect their beauty from careless hands. Then you are well named, Lily smiled, and Jonathan felt his heart clench at the sight of that expression on his daughter's face. How long had it been since she had smiled like that? Lily, we must go, he said more gently this time. He approached and gently took his daughter's hand. His eyes met Rose's again, and this time he truly saw her. Dark brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, a few rebellious strands escaping around a delicate face. Her eyes were a grey-green, like the sea on a cloudy day, and contained a quiet strength that contrasted with her humble position. Her hands, still bleeding, were slender but clearly accustomed to arduous work. "Thank you for being kind to my daughter," he said, and there was something in his voice that Rose couldn't quite identify. Gratitude, certainly, but also a carefully hidden vulnerability. "It was a pleasure to meet her, Mr. Pierce. Lady Lily is a charming child." As father and daughter headed for the door, Rose heard Lily ask, "Can we come back tomorrow, Papa? I want Rose to tell me more about flowers." Jonathan didn't answer immediately, but looked over his shoulder one last time. Rose was still kneeling amidst the porcelain shards, but there was something in her posture, dignified despite the circumstances, that unsettled him in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Perhaps," he said finally, and the word surprised them both. That night, in his immense Mayfair mansion, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He stood by his study window watching the dark streets of London, but all he saw were those grey-green eyes and the way that simple young woman had made his daughter smile. And in her tiny room in Whitechapel, Rose bandaged her own hands with clean rags, thinking of the blind girl who had found beauty in mere words, and of the somber father whose eyes seemed to contain oceans of unspoken pain. Neither of them imagined that this chance encounter was just the first thread of a tapestry that would intertwine their lives in ways that would transform them both forever. The black carriage bearing the Pierce coat of arms remained parked in front of the Westminster Cafe for 3 consecutive days, always at the same afternoon hour. Rose watched from the foggy kitchen window, her still bandaged hands holding the cast-iron kettle, as Jonathan Pierce and little Lily entered the establishment with Swiss clock punctuality. Mr. Whitmore had transformed into an entirely different creature since the magnate's first visit. His round cheeks flushed each time the doorbell announced the arrival of the distinguished patrons, and he practically flew across the room to greet them personally, bowing in such deep reverences that Rose feared he would lose his balance. "Rose!" he called on the 3rd day, his voice laden with a mixture of nervousness and opportunity. "Mr. Pierce specifically requested that you attend to him. Quickly, girl, do not make a man of his standing wait." Rose felt her stomach clench. Since that first encounter, she had avoided passing near their table, convinced that her presence would only remind the gentleman of the embarrassing incident. But now, there was no escape. With trembling hands, she smoothed her grey apron over her simple brown cotton dress and approached the table by the window where father and daughter always sat. The afternoon light filtered through the stained panes, creating golden patterns on the white tablecloth. "Rose!" Lily exclaimed before she could even curtsy. The girl turned her face towards her footsteps, a radiant smile illuminating her delicate features. "I would know your footsteps anywhere. They are lighter than the others, as if you are dancing even when you merely walk." Lady Lily. What a charming observation. Rose couldn't suppress a smile, her nervousness partially dissolving before the child's genuine joy. How may I serve you today? The usual tea, Jonathan said, his deep voice maintaining that controlled tone Rose was beginning to recognize as a carefully constructed armor. But when his eyes met hers, there was something different there, a curiosity that hadn't been present before. And some scones, if available. And Rose. Lily leaned forward, her small hands resting on the table with palpable anticipation. Can you stay and talk with us? Just for a few moments. Papa said it wouldn't inconvenience you, but I told him you aren't the kind of person who would mind talking to a blind girl. Lily, we cannot impose such an inconvenience on Miss Rose. She has her duties. Jonathan spoke quickly, but Rose caught something in his expression, a hope carefully disguised that she might accept the invitation. Rose looked around the cafe. There were only 3 other customers, all already served, and Mr. Whitmore watched the scene with the intensity of a hawk, clearly calculating the advantages of keeping Jonathan Pierce satisfied. I can stay for a few moments while the tea is prepared, she said softly, and was rewarded with a muffled cry of delight from Lily. Rose pulled a chair from an adjacent table and sat, maintaining the upright posture she had been taught by her mother so many years ago. Jonathan watched the movement with disconcerting attention, noticing the natural grace in her gestures, despite her simple clothes and hands still marked by the cuts. Tell me more about flowers, Lily asked immediately, her hands seeking roses across the table. When she found them, she held them gently, her fingers tracing the edges of the bandages. Are your hands getting better? I was very worried. They are healing well, my lady. Your concern warms my heart. Rose looked at Jonathan, finding him already watching her with that unsettling intensity. As for flowers, what do you wish to know? What is a garden like? A real garden, not just pretty or colorful. I want to know what it truly is like. Rose closed her eyes for a moment, transporting herself to the small garden her mother had kept behind their country cottage before illness took her. When she began to speak, her voice took on an almost musical quality. Imagine you are walking along a path of uneven stones. Each step makes a different sound. Tap, tap, tap. As if the stones are talking to each other, the air has layers of scents. First, the green. Fresh aroma of freshly cut grass which tickles your nose. Then as you walk, the roses appear. The red ones are the boldest. Their scent embraces you like a warm shawl. The yellow ones are more discreet, sweet like honey mixed with lemon. Lily was completely still, her blind eyes fixed on Rose, but her expression was one of total absorption. Jonathan, too, had leaned forward imperceptibly, captured by the cadence of her words. There is lavender, too, and it doesn't wait for you to approach. Its scent flies to you on the wind, like tiny, fragrant ghosts. And if you reach out as you walk, your palms touch petals that are like a baby's softest skin, but fresher, almost cool. Some have the texture of silk, others of velvet. The leaves are completely different, rougher, with veins you can feel beneath your fingers like miniature rivers. And the sounds? Lily whispered, utterly captivated. Ah, the sounds are a symphony of their own. The deep hum of bees, so busy they don't mind your presence. The sharp rustle of small birds hopping from branch to branch. And if there's a fountain, the water sings, sometimes a low murmur like a secret conversation, other times a joyful gurgle like laughter. When Rose finally opened her eyes, she found Jonathan observing her with an expression that made her blush. It wasn't the superficial admiration she sometimes saw in men's eyes, but something deeper, respect perhaps, and a sadness that seemed to permeate everything in his life. That was extraordinary, he said, his voice softer than Rose had ever heard him speak before. You have a gift, Miss Rose. My daughter saw more in these few minutes than in months of conventional descriptions. It is simply the truth, sir. The world is full of wonders when we pay enough attention. Papa, can we have a garden like that? Lily turned towards her father's voice. A garden where I can truly know the flowers. Jonathan hesitated, and Rose saw pain cross his face like a passing cloud. His Mayfair garden was meticulously kept, perfect in its formal symmetry, but completely impersonal. After Eleanor had left, he had never cared for such things again. We will see what can be done, he said finally, and Lily seemed satisfied with the answer. The tea arrived, brought by Mary, Another maid who looked at Rose with a mixture of curiosity and envy. Rose rose to leave, but Lily's hand quickly squeezed hers. "Will you return tomorrow? I want to know about other things. About music, perhaps, or about food. No one ever truly explains to me what things are like. If my duties allow and your father consents." "I consent." Jonathan's reply was immediate, surprising everyone, including himself. He cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "That is, if Mr. Whitmore doesn't object to you sparing a few moments of your time to entertain my daughter during our visits." Mr. Whitmore, who had been listening to everything while pretending to polish glasses behind the counter, practically scurried over to them. "It would be an honor, Mr. Pierce. Rose is our most talented employee. Feel free to request her presence whenever you wish." In the days that followed, an unusual routine was established. Jonathan and Lily arrived punctually at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They would have their tea, and Rose would sit with them for 15, sometimes 20 minutes, painting the world with words for the blind girl. She described morning markets where vendors cried out their wares, the scent of fresh fish mingled with warm bread. She spoke of the River Thames at dawn, when the mist transformed boats into gliding ghosts. She explained what rain was like, not just wet, but how each drop had its own sound as it hit different surfaces. The soft drumming on leaves, the metallic patter on gutters, the almost inaudible whisper on soft earth. And as Rose spoke, Jonathan watched. He watched how her hands moved gracefully as she described things, how her eyes lit up when Lily laughed, how there was a genuine intelligence and natural compassion in every word. He began to notice small details, how she discreetly bit her lower lip when thoughtful, how her fingers tapped lightly on the table when searching for the exact word, how her smile completely transformed her face, making it not just beautiful, but luminous. And that frightened him, because Jonathan Pierce had sworn never to allow his heart to open again. Eleanor had destroyed something fundamental within him when she left, not just by abandoning him, but by looking at their own daughter with repugnance after the fever had stolen her sight. "I cannot bear to look at her," Eleanor had said, her poisoned words etched into his memory. "She is no longer perfect. She is no longer my daughter." He had built walls around his heart, dedicating himself entirely to business and to ensuring Lily had everything materially. But he had never known how to reach her emotionally, how to penetrate the world of silence and darkness in which she had taken refuge. Until Rose, a simple cafe maid who, with nothing but words and genuine kindness, had done what he hadn't been able to in 3 years. She had brought Lily back to life. On the 6th afternoon, as Rose described what it was like to gaze at stars, Lily gently fell asleep in her chair, a tranquil smile on her lips. Jonathan watched his daughter sleep, something she rarely did with such peace. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice laden with an emotion he could no longer completely hide. "You don't know the gift you've given her to me." Rose met his eyes and for the first time allowed herself to truly see him. Not the wealthy magnate, not the important client, but the man. A deeply wounded man carrying immense responsibilities on shoulders that seemed to be bowing under the weight. "Lady Lily is special," she said softly. She just needed someone to see the world through her, not despite her. Something passed between them in that moment, a silent understanding neither was prepared to name. And when Jonathan finally rose to carry the sleeping Lily home, he knew with a disturbing certainty that his life would never be the same. Because Rose was not just someone who had brought light to his daughter. She had begun, in some inexplicable way, to dissipate the shadows he carried in his own heart. And that was simultaneously the most wonderful and most terrifying thing that had happened to him in years. The cold morning breeze swept through the streets of London as Rose crossed Westminster Bridge, her worn boots clattering on the damp stones. She had left her room before dawn, as she did every morning, but today she carried something beyond her usual fatigue, a restlessness she couldn't name. It had been 2 weeks since Jonathan Pierce and Lily began their daily visits to the cafe. 2 weeks during which Rose found herself counting the hours until 3 in the afternoon, her eyes constantly drifting to the window, awaiting the black carriage. And that frightened her. She knew her place in the world. Orphaned at 16, raised in a modest country home until illness took her parents, Rose had quickly learned that dreams were luxuries people like her couldn't afford. She had worked as a governess, a seamstress, and finally a cafe maid, always keeping her head down, doing her work, surviving. There was no room in her life for fantasies about sad-eyed magnates and their charming daughters, but the heart, she had discovered, cared little for what was sensible. The Westminster Cafe was silent when she arrived. Mr. Whitmore had not yet come down from his upstairs quarters, and Rose took advantage of the solitude to light the fireplaces and prepare the first kettles. Work had always been her refuge, and her movements assumed the comforting rhythm of routine. It was the sound of urgent knocking at the back door that broke her concentration. Rose opened it to find a street boy, no more than 10 years old, trembling in the morning cold. His clothes were ill-fitting rags and his bare feet were bluish. "Please, ma'am," he panted, holding a sealed envelope with dirty fingers. "A gentleman paid me £1 to deliver this to Miss Rose, who works here. He said it was urgent." With trembling hands, Rose accepted the envelope. The paper was of the finest quality, pale cream with gilded edges, and the red wax seal bore a crest she recognized immediately, that of the Pierces. "Wait here," she told the boy, disappearing for a moment to return with a piece of fresh bread and a shilling. The boy's eyes widened. "This is too much, ma'am. Take it, and buy shoes before you lose your toes to the cold." When the boy left, Rose locked herself in the small pantry, her hands trembling as she broke the seal. The handwriting was elegant, masculine, each letter precisely formed. "Miss Rose, forgive me for the impropriety of this communication. I find myself in circumstances that require your assistance, if you are willing to grant it. Lily fell ill during the night with a high fever. The doctors have attended to her and assured me there is no immediate danger, but she is extremely distressed. She cries out in her sleep, weeps when she awakens, and nothing I do seems to console her. She asks for you repeatedly. Rose would understand, she says. Rose would know what it is like to be frightened in the dark. I know I have no right to request this, and that your absence from work could cause you difficulties. I am prepared to compensate Mr. Whitmore for your time and ensure you suffer no consequences. My coachman awaits near Westminster Bridge and has orders to bring you immediately to my residence if you consent. Not as your social superior, but as a desperate father, I implore your help. Your humble servant, Jonathan Pierce. Rose read the letter 3 times, each word imprinting itself on her mind. There was something in the broken formality of those lines, in the raw vulnerability of desperate father, that squeezed her heart painfully. She did not hesitate. She hung up her apron, grabbed her warmest shawl, and left a quick note for Mr. Whitmore explaining a family emergency. She knew it could cost her the job, but the image of a frightened, feverish Lily dissolved any concern for consequences. The carriage waited exactly where Jonathan had said, discreet, but unmistakably luxurious. The coachman, a middle-aged man with a kind expression, helped her in without asking questions or showing judgment for her simple clothes. As they traversed the increasingly elegant streets towards Mayfair, Rose watched the city transform. The narrow, dirty alleys of Whitechapel gave way to wide, tree-lined avenues, modest houses replaced by imposing mansions with wrought-iron gates. The Pierce residence was breathtakingly magnificent, 3 stories of pale stone, soaring windows reflecting the grey morning sky, impeccably maintained gardens stretching in all directions. Rose suddenly felt acutely aware of every patch on her clothes, every calloused spot on her hands. But when the door opened and she saw Jonathan Pierce standing in the entrance hall, all concerns about her appearance vanished. He was unrecognizable as the controlled gentleman from the cafe. His hair was disheveled, as if he had spent the night running his hands through it. He wore no coat, only a shirt and waistcoat, both crumpled. Dark shadows ringed his eyes, and there was a tension throughout his body that spoke of hours of sleepless worry. "You came," he said, and there was such relief in his voice that Rose felt tears sting her eyes. "I feared that. Thank you. Heavens, thank you. How is she?" "The fever has subsided slightly, but she won't stop crying. The governess is with her now, but—" A sharp cry cut off his words, echoing through the mansion's corridors. It was a child in pure terror, and Rose immediately recognized Lily's voice. Without thinking, Without asking permission, Rose ran in the direction of the sound, her instincts guiding her upstairs. Jonathan hurried after her, indicating the corridor to the left. Lily's bedroom door was ajar, and through it, Rose could hear an older female voice ineffectively trying to soothe the hysterical child. Rose entered to find a room fit for a fairy tale princess, wallpaper in shades of pale blue, delicately carved white furniture, a canopy bed draped with lace. But amidst all that perfection, Lily was huddled against the headboard, her face wet with tears and sweat, her small fists clutching the sheets as if they were the only solid thing in a spinning world. "Miss, please," said the governess, a robust woman with grey hair. "You must rest." "Lily." Rose spoke softly, yet clearly enough to cut through the panic. The girl became instantly still. "Rose?" Her voice was a hopeful, frightened whisper. "Is that truly you?" "It's me, dear." Rose approached the bed slowly, aware that sudden movements might frighten the child further. "I came as soon as your father called me. I can't find the light." Tears streamed freely down Lily's face. "I know you're blind when you're sick," Papa told me. "But there are always sounds, there's always something. But now there's only darkness and it's swallowing me whole and I can't breathe." Rose sat on the edge of the bed and gently took Lily's feverish hands in hers. "Breathe with me, my little lady. Inhale. Count to 3. Exhale. That's right. Again." Gradually, Lily's frantic breathing began to steady. Rose continued holding her hands, aware of Jonathan standing in the doorway, watching with an expression of intense emotion. "The fever is frightening you," Rose said when Lily had finally calmed enough to listen. "It confuses your mind, makes everything seem worse than it really is. But I am real. Your father is real. We are here, and we will not leave you." "Don't leave me," Lily whispered, clinging to Rose with surprising strength. "Please don't leave me alone in the dark." Rose looked at Jonathan, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded immediately. "Stay as long as is necessary," he said, his voice hoarse. "Miss Burton, provide a comfortable chair and anything Miss Rose requires, and let no one disturb them." The governess, though clearly surprised by the situation, obeyed without question. When everyone had left, leaving only Rose and Lily, the girl nestled against Rose like a small wounded animal seeking comfort. "Tell me about the sea," Lily asked faintly. "I never saw it when I could see. I always wanted to know what it's like." And then Rose began to paint the ocean with words, describing the waves that whispered ancient secrets, the foam that danced like lace upon the sand, the scent of salt that cleansed the lungs. She spoke of seagulls that cried out their noisy conversations, of shells that held the sound of the sea within them like liquid memories. As she spoke, her hands gently stroked Lily's hair, and gradually she felt the girl's fever begin to subside, her body relaxing into sleep. What Rose didn't know was that Jonathan hadn't left. He had remained on the other side of the ajar door, listening to every word, watching through the crack as that young maid held his daughter as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And as he watched, something within him, something he had thought dead since Eleanor left, began to awaken. It was not simply gratitude, though there was an abundance of that. It was not just admiration for her kindness, though that too was present. It was something deeper, more unsettling, more inevitable. It was the recognition that Rose was not just someone who had brought light to Lily. She had begun to illuminate the darkest corners of his own heart, places he had carefully kept in shadow for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to feel warmth there. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Pierce allowed himself to consider the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, he was not destined to live the rest of his days in the emotional penumbra he had chosen as punishment for his failures. Perhaps there was hope. Perhaps there was a future beyond mere survival. Perhaps there was Rose. Rose remained at the Pierce mansion for 3 days and 2 nights, refusing to leave Lily's side until the fever broke completely, and the girl smiled again. During that time, something fundamental shifted within the walls of that grand house. Jonathan watched from afar, fascinated by the transformation, not just in his daughter, but in the entire atmosphere of his home. Rose had brought with her a lightness he hadn't realized was missing. She spoke to the servants as equals, treating the stern butler, Mr. Pemberton, with such kindness that even the stony man had begun to smile discreetly. She hummed as she walked through the corridors, her simple melodies echoing through spaces that had long known only solemn silence. And Jonathan could not stop observing her. It was the way her fingers traced abstract patterns in the air as she told Lily stories, as if weaving invisible magic. It was the crease of concentration between her eyebrows when she searched for the exact word to describe something. It was the way she bit her lower lip when she thought no one was looking, a gesture so unconscious and charming that he found himself anticipating it. On the third afternoon, when Lily had finally fallen into a deep, healthy sleep, Rose emerged from the girls' room to find Jonathan waiting in the corridor. He stood by the tall window overlooking the gardens, his hands clasped behind his back, a solitary silhouette against the silvery light of the cloudy day. "She is well," Rose said softly, approaching. She felt awkward in his presence now. In this intimate space, without Lily's presence as a bridge between their very different worlds, the fever has completely broken. She just needs rest. Jonathan turned, and the intensity in his eyes made Rose take a step back. There was something there she couldn't quite decipher. Gratitude, certainly, but also something more dangerous, more wild. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that contrasted dramatically with the controlled man she had known at the coffee house. "You saved my daughter, not just from a fever, but from something far more insidious. She was losing herself in her own darkness, and I didn't know how to reach her. I did nothing extraordinary. I merely treated her as she deserves to be treated, as a whole person, not as a tragedy. And there lies your gift." Jonathan took a step towards her, then stopped, as if fighting against himself. Most people look at Lily and see only what she has lost. You look at her and see all that she is. Rose felt heat rise up her neck. Being so close to him without the distraction of serving tea or entertaining Lily made her aware of unsettling details. The strong line of his jaw, the small scar on his eyebrow whose story she longed to know, the way his eyes darkened when they rested on her, as if he were seeing something that simultaneously drew him in and frightened him. "I must return to the coffee house," she said, breaking the tense moment. "Mr. Whitmore has already been more than patient." "About that?" Jonathan seemed to hesitate, a rare thing for him. "I took the liberty of speaking personally with Mr. Whitmore. I compensated him generously for your time and assured him that your position remains secure. You did not need to do that." "I needed to. Rose." He pronounced her name as if testing its weight on his tongue, and the sound sent a shiver down her spine. "Lily needs you. These 3 days have shown me how much she has blossomed under your care. I would like to propose an arrangement." Rose felt her stomach clench. An arrangement? Of course. She was a servant, useful, convenient. Why had she imagined, even for a moment, that those intense glances meant anything beyond gratitude for services rendered? "What kind of arrangement, sir?" "I would like you to come and work here, as Lily's companion. Not a common governess, but someone specifically dedicated to helping her explore the world in ways others don't think to do. I would pay generously, naturally. You would have your own quarters, appropriate days off." No. The word came out stronger than Rose intended, surprising both of them. Jonathan stood completely still. "No. Do the terms not please you? We can negotiate." "It is not a matter of terms, Mr. Pierce." Rose forced herself to meet his eyes, though it pained her to do so. "I deeply appreciate Lady Lily. But if I were to come and work here, I would become just another employee in your vast house, another person paid to care for her, and what Lily needs is not another servant. She needs genuine friends, real connections not bought with gold coins." Jonathan seemed to have been struck. Something passed across his face, pain, understanding, and something deeper that Rose couldn't identify. "You are right," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "I have always been so accustomed to solving problems with money that I forgot the most valuable things cannot be bought. Forgive my presumption." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Rose knew she should leave now, put distance between herself and this dangerously complicated man, but her feet did not move. "May I ask you something?" Jonathan said suddenly. "It is too personal, but why does someone with your intelligence, your capacity for observation and articulation, work as a coffee house maid? Your education is evident in your speech, in your manners." Rose turned to the window, observing the impeccable gardens below, gardens so perfectly maintained that they seemed unreal, more like paintings than living places. "My father was the vicar of a small parish," Kunshi said finally. "We had no wealth, but there were books, so many books, and he taught me everything, literature, history, even some Latin. My mother cultivated a magnificent garden, teaching me the names of every flower, every plant. They believed that education was the greatest gift they could give." She paused, the old familiar ache tightening her chest. "Then the fever came. It took them in a matter of weeks. I was 16 and had a 12-year-old sister. The parish needed the house for the new vicar. There were no close relatives, no inheritance. We did what we could. I worked wherever I could find employment, sending what I could to keep my sister in a modest school in the countryside. Education may not feed the stomach, but it feeds the soul. And sometimes that is all we have." When she finally looked at Jonathan again, there were unshed tears burning in her eyes, and she saw, reflected on his face, a deep understanding. "My wife left us when Lily lost her sight," he said abruptly, the words escaping as if held captive for too long. "Eleanor could not bear imperfection. She saw our daughter as a broken doll, something that shamed her perfect aesthetic of the world." He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling his careful coiffure. "I blame myself for not having seen who she truly was before we married, for choosing beauty and social position over character, for allowing my daughter to suffer because I was foolish enough to love someone incapable of truly loving in return." "Love is not foolishness," Rose said softly, "and the capacity to love, even when it hurts, is what keeps us human." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared pains, of parallel solitudes. Jonathan took a step towards her, then another, until they were so close that Rose could see the tiny flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the pulse beating in his throat. "Rose," he said, and her name in his voice sounded like a prayer. "Papa." Lily's sleepy voice interrupted the moment like a jarring bell. "Is Rose still here?" Jonathan recoiled as if burned, the mask of control slipping back into place. But when his eyes met Rose's one last time before she turned to attend to Lily, she saw something there that made her tremble. Desire, confusion, and something dangerously close to hope. In the days that followed Rose's return to the coffee house, Jonathan found he could concentrate on nothing. Business meetings passed in a blur. Contracts awaited his signature, unread. His mind constantly wandered back to that moment in the corridor, the vulnerability in Rose's grey-green eyes. The way the light filtered through the window transformed her brown hair into shades of amber and gold. Lily spoke incessantly about Rose. When would they return to the coffee house? When would Rose come to visit them again? Could Rose come to dinner? Each question was a gentle knife in Jonathan's heart, because he desired the same things but dared not admit it aloud. On the night of the 5th day, he found himself in his study well after midnight, observing the empty street below. A bottle of brandy remained untouched on his desk. He did not want to numb his thoughts, but rather to understand them, to classify them, to control them. But Rose was not something that could be controlled or categorized. She was an unexpected gale in his meticulously ordered life, and he did not know whether he should open his windows to let her in completely or close them firmly, before she destroyed everything he had built to protect himself. What he knew, with a certainty that terrified him, was that he would not be able to get Rose out of his thoughts, and perhaps for the first time in years he did not want to. Morning brought with it a dense fog that enveloped London like a grey shroud, making the streets almost unrecognizable. Rose crossed Westminster Bridge with hurried steps, her frayed shawl offering little protection against the penetrating dampness. She had left earlier than usual, unable to remain in her tiny room where thoughts of Jonathan Pierce kept her awake until the early hours of the morning. 5 days. 5 days since she had left the Pierce mansion, and each of them weighed like an eternity. She had tried to convince herself that it was merely concern for Lily, but her heart knew the truth her mind refused to accept. The Westminster coffee house was silent when she arrived, but the quiet was quickly broken by the arrival of Mr. Whitmore, his habitually rosy face now alarmingly pale. "Rose, thank heavens you haven't left yet." He held a thick envelope, its seal already broken. "I've just received the most extraordinary news, Mr. Pierce." He bought the coffee house. Rose felt the floor waver beneath her feet. "Forgive me, sir, but surely I have not understood you correctly." He bought the entire establishment. Whitmore seemed torn between euphoria and perplexity. "He paid 3 times its value on the condition that I remain as manager. And there's more." He extended a second letter, this one with the intact Pierce seal. "This is for you." With trembling hands, Rose accepted the envelope. She immediately recognized the elegant handwriting, each letter formed with meticulous precision. Miss Rose. "Forgive my audacity in this gesture, but I find myself in an intolerable situation. Lily refuses to eat properly, spends her days sitting by the window awaiting our visit to the coffee house, and each night cries out for you. The doctors assure me there is nothing physically wrong with her, but I know the truth. My daughter is wasting away from the absence of your presence. I cannot bear to see her like this. Not again. Therefore, I have taken the liberty of acquiring the Westminster coffee house. I did not do so to control you or manipulate your situation, but to offer you something that cannot be interpreted as charity or condescension. The establishment is now a Pierce property, but you will have complete autonomy over your hours and duties. If you wish to continue serving tea, do so. If you wish never to see us again, that is your right. But I implore you, out of compassion for my daughter, that you at least come to visit her. Not as an employee, not as an obligation, but as the friend she desperately needs. And if I am completely honest, something I promised myself I would be in this letter, I make this request also for selfish reasons. Because in the last 5 days, I have discovered that the corridors of my house seem emptier without the sound of your voice. Because my daughter is not the only one who feels your absence like a physical wound. I ask nothing of you beyond your consideration, but know that my door will always be open to you. Jonathan. Rose read the letter 3 times, each word engraving itself upon her heart like fire on parchment. He had signed simply, Jonathan, without titles, without formalities, and there was something in the raw vulnerability of those final lines that made her tremble. "Well?" Mr. Whitmore watched her anxiously. "What does the gentleman say?" "He requests that I visit Lady Lily." Rose folded the letter carefully, pressing it against her chest. "She is not well." "Then you must go immediately." Whitmore practically pushed her towards the door. "The man bought an entire establishment for your sake, lass. Don't make him wait for an answer." But Rose hesitated, torn between the overwhelming desire to rush to Lily and the paralyzing fear of what she would find when she arrived. It was not only the girl who awaited her, but also Jonathan. And after that letter, after those words laden with unspoken meanings, how could she look at him without revealing everything she felt? The decision was made for her when the coffee house door opened violently, and a small figure wrapped in a coat of much too large velvet stumbled in, followed by a visibly disturbed coachman. "Lily!" Rose rushed to the girl, dropping to her knees before her. The child was pale as paper, her blind eyes desperately searching in the direction of Rose's voice. "I knew you would be here." Lily's voice was a trembling whisper. "Papa wouldn't take me, so I ran away. I told Coachman Morrison that Papa had ordered him to bring me. He believed it because I'm good at lying when I need to. My dear child, your father must be frantic with worry. I don't care." Tears began to roll down Lily's face. "He doesn't take me to see you. He doesn't explain why you stopped coming. He thinks I don't notice when he's sad, but I do. I hear it in his voice. And I know it's because of you. Why did you leave us? Did we do something wrong?" Rose pulled the girl into her arms, her own heart breaking. "No, never. You did nothing wrong, my sweet Lily. Adults are sometimes foolish and complicate things that should be simple." The door opened again with such force that it slammed against the wall. Jonathan Pierce stood there, his chest rising and falling rapidly, hair completely disheveled, without a cravat or coat. He seemed to have run through the streets of London like a man possessed. His eyes found Lily in Rose's arms, and the expression on his face shifted from terror to gratitude, and finally to something so intense that Rose had to look away. "Lily." His voice was hoarse, laden with raw emotion. "You cannot simply run off like that. I nearly died of fright when I discovered you had left." "Then you shouldn't have kept me away from Rose." Lily clung to Rose with stubborn strength. "She is my friend." "I don't have many friends, Papa. People pity me or they're uncomfortable. But Rose never did that, and you pushed her away." "I didn't." Jonathan ran a hand over his face, and Rose saw that his hands were trembling. "Lily, it's complicated." "It's not complicated." The girl turned her face in the direction of her father's voice, and there was a wisdom in her expression that transcended her 8 years. "You like her. I know you like her because your voice changes when you speak about her. And she likes you too. I can feel it in the way you breathe when you enter the room." The silence that followed was absolute. Rose felt the blood drain from her face, unable to look at Jonathan, but she could feel his gaze on her, heavy and questioning. "Lily, there are things you don't understand." Jonathan approached slowly, as if he feared startling them both. "Rose and I, we live in very different worlds." "Then change the worlds." Lily freed herself from Rose's arms and took determined steps in the direction of her father's voice, her hands outstretched until they found his waistcoat. "You're the richest man in London, everyone says so. You can do anything, why not this?" Rose finally found the courage to stand and look at Jonathan. What she saw in his eyes stole her breath. It was not just desire or gratitude, but something deeper, more permanent. There was fear there too, and vulnerability, and a silent question that made her tremble. "Because," Jonathan spoke directly to Rose, not to Lily, "because some things are more precious than gold, and I fear destroying them with my touch. Because I have already failed spectacularly once to protect what I love, and the idea of failing again paralyzes me." "And what if you don't fail?" Rose heard herself ask, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What if your only failure is never to try?" Lily looked between them, her blind eyes not seeing but perceiving everything. Slowly, with the intuitive wisdom of children, she moved away, finding the nearest chair and sitting down, clearly determined to wait. Jonathan took a step towards Rose, then another, until he was so close that she could see the small lines of fatigue around his eyes, the shadow of stubble that suggested a sleepless night. "You terrify me." His voice was low, meant only for her. "You make me feel things I swore I would never allow again. And yet, I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot eat. I cannot sleep. I cannot focus on anything but the memory of your voice, your smile, the way you touch my daughter, as if she were the most precious treasure in the world." "Jonathan." His name escaped her lips like a prayer. "I am not a lady. I have no position, no fortune, nothing your society would consider appropriate. But you have something infinitely more valuable. You have genuine kindness. You have the ability to see beauty where others see only imperfection. You have a heart so vast it holds not just my broken daughter, but perhaps even me." He raised his hand hesitantly, his fingers lightly touching her face, tracing the line of her jaw with reverence. "I ask nothing of you now except a chance, an opportunity to prove that different worlds can meet, that a shadowy magnate and a maid with a poet's soul can create something beautiful together." Rose closed her eyes, allowing herself for the first time to imagine that possibility. It would not be easy. Society would judge them, there would be scandals and difficulties. But when she opened her eyes again and saw the raw hope on his face, she knew that some things were worth any fight. A chance. She covered his hand with hers, but with conditions. A slow smile, the first genuine one she had seen on him, completely transformed his face. "Name them. Not as your employee, not as your obligation, as your equal or nothing." "As my equal." He repeated the words like a sacred vow. "As the woman who returned to me the capacity to feel, as the person who saved not only my daughter, but me." And there, in the modest coffee house that now belonged to him, with Lily smiling radiantly in her corner and Mr. Whitmore politely pretending not to observe, Jonathan Pierce leaned in and gently kissed Rose's forehead, a gesture so tender that it brought tears to her eyes. It was only the beginning, they both knew. There would be obstacles, difficulties, moments of doubt. But as he held her hand as if it were an anchor in a storm, Rose allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, love could truly transcend the barriers the world erected between souls destined to meet. The news of the romance between Jonathan Pierce and a humble coffeehouse maid spread through London like wildfire. In elegant Mayfair salons, high society ladies whispered scandalized behind ivory fans. In exclusive gentlemen's clubs, businessmen shook their heads in disapproval, questioning if the magnate had completely lost his mind. Rose felt the weight of those stares the first time Jonathan insisted on accompanying her publicly through the streets. They walked through Kensington Gardens, Lily between them, holding both their hands. When an elderly lady in a purple dress stopped abruptly in their path, her face contorting in thinly disguised repulsion, "Mr. Pierce, surely it is not this creature with whom the newspapers associate you." The woman spoke as if Rose were invisible, her voice laden with aristocratic venom. "Lady Hartwell told me the most extraordinary story about an incident involving spilled tea. I presume you understand the implications of your choice for your daughter's reputation." Jonathan stopped, and Rose felt his muscles tense beneath his perfectly tailored coat. But before he could reply, Lily stepped forward, her small hand still firmly holding Rose's. "Do you know Rose, madam?" the girl asked, her voice clear and fearless. "She taught me that the most important people don't always wear the most expensive clothes. That kindness is more valuable than gold, and that quick judgment is the mark of a small mind." The woman gaped like a fish out of water. Jonathan placed his free hand on Lily's shoulder, pride evident in his expression. "My daughter expresses herself with more wisdom than many adults I know." His voice was glacial, each word sharp as a blade. "And as for Miss Rose, she possesses more grace and dignity in her little finger than most society ladies in their entire bodies. Now, if you will excuse us, we have a picnic to enjoy." He guided Rose and Lily around the stunned woman, but Rose felt the tremor in her own hands. When they finally found a quiet nook beneath an ancient oak, she gently released his hand. "Jonathan, this won't work." The words burned her throat like gall. "I cannot allow your reputation to be destroyed because of me, or worse, Lily's. Lily's reputation is perfectly safe as long as she is beside two people who love her unconditionally." Jonathan reached for her hand again, refusing to let it go. "And as for my own reputation, I have found that I value your presence far more than the approval of hypocrites who measure human worth by the weight of gold coffers. But society would not be easily dissuaded. In the following days, anonymous letters began to arrive at the Pierce mansion. Some warned Jonathan about the dangers of elevating someone above their natural station. Others were cruel in ways that made Rose weep when she thought no one was watching, questioning her intentions, calling her a fortune hunter, suggesting she used Lily to manipulate her father. Jonathan burned each letter without reading more than the first few lines, but he could not protect Rose from the gossip that followed her like persistent shadows. She began to refuse invitations to accompany him to social events, inventing excuses about duties at the coffee house or fatigue. It was Lady Helena Ashford, Jonathan's distant cousin and one of the few voices of reason among the aristocracy, who finally confronted Rose directly. She appeared at the Westminster Coffee House on a grey afternoon, her elegant presence contrasting dramatically with the modest surroundings. "Miss Rose, may we speak?" It wasn't really a question. Lady Helena indicated a table in the corner, and Rose had no choice but to join her. The woman was perhaps 40, with dark hair beginning to grey at the temples, and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to read souls. She wore a dark green silk dress, simple by her standards, but which would cost Rose a year's wages. "I presume you have come to warn me about my place." Rose kept her voice firm, though her hands trembled beneath the table. "To join the chorus of voices that judge me." On the contrary, Lady Helena accepted the tea Rose served, taking a delicate sip before continuing. "I came because I love Jonathan as if he were my own brother. He suffered horribly at the hands of my cousin Eleanor, who was everything society approved of, Beautiful, well-born, perfectly educated, and completely devoid of genuine compassion. Rose looked at the woman with cautious surprise. "I have observed you with Lily." Lady Helena placed her cup on its saucer with softness. "I have observed how you touch her, not with the hesitation of one who fears contamination, but with genuine tenderness. I have seen how Jonathan looks at you, and it is something I thought I would never witness in him again. Hope. I have not come here to judge you, but to offer you something you will need if you intend to survive what is to come." "And what would that be?" "Allies." Lady Helena leaned forward, her expression serious. "Society is cruel to those who defy its rules, but it is not monolithic. There are those among us who value character over pedigree, substance over appearance. Allow me to introduce you to these people. Allow me to teach you how to navigate this world that was never meant to include you." Rose felt tears burn her eyes. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because someone who makes Jonathan truly smile for the first time in years deserves to be protected. And because Lily deserves to grow up seeing that genuine love can transcend artificial barriers." In the following days, Lady Helena became a constant presence in Rose's life. She taught her subtleties of etiquette that no book could convey: when to curtsy and for how long, how to hold a wine glass, how to gracefully deflect veiled insults. She introduced her to a small but influential circle of progressive aristocrats who, though surprised by Jonathan's choice, were willing to give Rose a chance. But the most valuable lesson came unexpectedly. Do not try to be something you are not. Lady Helena adjusted Rose's shawl as they prepared for an intimate dinner at her estate. "Your strength lies precisely in your authenticity. Jonathan does not wish you transformed into a poor copy of Eleanor. He loves you exactly as you are." The dinner was a trial by fire. 6 aristocratic couples, all observing Rose with curiosity, ranging from genuine to malicious. Rose felt like a specimen under glass, every movement scrutinized, every word weighed and evaluated. It was Lord Pemberton, an elderly gentleman with kind eyes, who broke the tension. "Miss Rose, I hear you have a remarkable talent for vivid descriptions. My own granddaughter is progressively losing her hearing, and she has become increasingly withdrawn. Perhaps you could share your approach." And so Rose found herself telling about Lily, about how she painted the world with words, about how each sense could compensate for another when given proper attention. She spoke with the same genuine passion she used with the girl, temporarily forgetting her nervousness. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before Lady Pemberton, the Lord's wife, discreetly wiped tears from her eyes. "My dear, this is extraordinary. Would you have time to visit our Annabel? She is only 7 and is so frightened by what is happening." Rose looked at Jonathan from across the table. He watched her with an expression that made her blush, pride mingled with something deeper, more intimate. "It would be an honor." Her voice was firm now, confident. The evening ended not in dramatic triumph, but in gradual acceptance. Not all present became allies, but neither were they hostile, and as Jonathan held her hand during the carriage ride home, Rose allowed herself to believe that perhaps they could build a bridge between their worlds. "You were magnificent." Jonathan brought her hand to his lips, gently kissing her knuckles. "You did not try to impress them. You were merely yourself, and that was more powerful than any rehearsed performance." Lady Helena helped considerably. "Helena is wise. She understands that authenticity cannot be faked." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Rose, I know this has been difficult. The gossip, the constant judgment. If you wish to retreat, if this is too much." "No." She squeezed his hand firmly. "I will not retreat. Not because it is easy, but because it is worth fighting for. You and Lily are worth any difficulty." When they arrived at the mansion, they found Lily still awake despite the late hour, sitting on the staircase with her favorite doll. "I couldn't sleep without knowing if Rose had survived the evening." The girl stood, locating Rose by her voice and running into her arms. "Tell me everything. Were they cruel? Were you brave?" Rose knelt, embracing the girl. "Some were curious, others reserved, but Lady Helena was right. Being myself was my greatest strength." "Of course it was." Lily spoke with the absolute confidence of childhood. "Because you are wonderful exactly as you are." Later, when Lily finally fell asleep and Rose was preparing to return to the coffee house, Jonathan stopped her at the door. "Stay." His voice was hoarse, laden with emotion. "Not as an employee, not as a visitor. Stay as part of this family. I will marry you if you will permit me. I will face any scandal. I will defy any convention." Rose touched his face gently, feeling the roughness of his stubble beneath her fingers. "Not yet." She saw pain cross his expression and hastened to explain, "Not because I don't love you. I love you more than words can express. But I need to do this the right way. I need to earn my place by your side, not merely be installed in it. Give me time to prove to them and to myself that I deserve to be here." Jonathan pulled her into an embrace, his heart beating strongly against her chest. "You have already proven everything that matters, but I will wait. I will wait as long as it takes because some loves are worth any patience." The months that followed were a delicate dance between two worlds, slowly learning to coexist. Rose continued working at the Westminster Cafe 3 days a week, insisting on maintaining her independence even when Jonathan protested that there was no need. But she understood something he was still learning. Her self-worth could not be measured solely by his love, but by her ability to remain true to herself. On the other days, she became a constant presence at Pierce Manor, not as a servant or a guest, but as something indefinable that society still struggled to categorize. She spent mornings with Lily, not just describing the world, but helping the girl explore it. Together, they walked through the gardens that Jonathan had transformed following Rose's suggestions, creating tactile paths with different stone textures, planting flowers, organized by fragrance instead of color. It was during one of these mornings, when the first spring flowers began to bloom, that Jonathan found them in the garden. Lily was kneeling by a lavender bed, her fingers gently touching the stems while Rose described how the bees danced among the flowers. He stopped at a distance, just observing. Rose wore a simple light blue cotton dress, a discreet gift from Lady Helena, who had managed to persuade her to accept it. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, something she would never do in public, but allowed in the privacy of the garden. The morning light transformed it into shades of amber and chocolate, and Jonathan felt his heart clench with the intensity of what he felt. 5 months. 5 months since that day at the cafe when Lily had run away, since that first chaste kiss on her forehead that promised whole worlds. And with each passing day, his love had grown in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Rose turned as if she had felt his gaze, and the smile that lit up her face when she saw him made something fundamental melt in his chest. Lily also noticed his presence, her head turning in the direction of his footsteps. "Papa, come feel the lavenders. Rose says they are particularly fragrant this year." Jonathan approached, kneeling beside them. The scent of lavender enveloped them like a soft cloud, but it was Rose's fragrance, something delicate he had never quite been able to identify, perhaps just simple soap and her own essence, that truly captured his attention. "They are perfect," he said, his eyes never leaving Rose's face. "Papa, you're not even touching the flowers," Lily observed with the keen perception she had developed. "You're looking at Rose again. I can feel when you do that because you both get very quiet and the air feels different." Rose blushed, turning quickly back to the flowers, but Jonathan caught her hand, preventing her from escaping. "Lily, could you give us a few moments?" His voice was gentle but firm. The girl smiled, that knowing smile she used when she felt she understood more than she should. "Finally, I was beginning to think it would take years." She stood up with Rose's help, then walked confidently along the stone path toward the house, counting her steps in a low voice. When they were alone, Jonathan did not release Rose's hand. Instead, he brought it to his lips, kissing each knuckle with a reverence that made her tremble. "These 5 months have simultaneously been the best and most frustrating weeks of my life," he said, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. "To watch you blossom, to see you gain confidence as you navigate this world that tried to reject you, has been my greatest privilege. But Rose, I can't wait any longer." Rose felt her heart quicken, but forced herself to keep her voice calm. "Wait for what?" "For you. To make this something permanent and unquestionable." He slipped to the ground, kneeling on the damp garden earth, completely oblivious to the stains that would certainly ruin his impeccable trousers. "You have proven to everyone who matters, and to many who do not, that your character transcends any class barrier. Lady Helena adores you. The Pembertons consider you practically a miracle after how you helped little Annabel. Even some of the most skeptical have begun to recognize your worth. Jonathan. But more important than all of that, you have proven something to me that I thought impossible. His hands trembled slightly as he held hers. You have proven that my heart was not dead, merely asleep awaiting the right person to awaken it. You have proven that genuine love knows no artificial boundaries of station or fortune, and you have proven every day that choosing you was the wisest decision I have ever made. He reached into his waistcoat pocket, withdrawing a small navy blue velvet box. This ring belonged to my grandmother, a woman who scandalized society by marrying a merchant against the wishes of her aristocratic family. She wore it for 50 years of happy marriage, and before she died, she made me promise that I would only give it to someone I loved with all my heart, without reservations or regrets. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a single emerald surrounded by small diamonds. It was not ostentatious, but it possessed a timeless elegance that stole Rose's breath away. Rose, my dear Rose. His voice broke slightly. I do not offer you an easy life. There will be those who will always judge us, always question us. But I offer you my whole heart, my absolute devotion, and the promise that I will spend every remaining day of my life assuring you that you are the most perfect choice I could have made. Will you marry me? Rose felt tears stream freely down her face. For months she had prepared for this moment, imagining how she would respond. But now that it was here, all the rehearsed words vanished, leaving only raw truth. When my parents died, I thought I had lost my chance to have a family again. Her voice trembled but remained firm. I worked, I survived, but I never truly lived. Then I walked into that cafe with a tea tray and found a little girl who saw the world in a way others couldn't, and a man who carried sorrow like a heavy cloak. She knelt too until they were at eye level. You gave me not only love, but purpose. Lily gave me back the joy of sharing beauty. Together you created a space in your lives where I could belong, not despite who I am, but because of it. How could I refuse such a gift? So it's a yes? It's an absolute yes, without hesitation, without doubt. Rose laughed through her tears. Yes, I will marry you, Jonathan Pierce, and we will face whatever comes together. He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her into a kiss that held all the months of waiting, all the patience, all the accumulated love. It wasn't their first kiss. There had been other stolen moments when Lily was asleep, or when they walked through the gardens at dusk. But this was different. This was promise and commitment, a declaration that they chose each other despite everything and everyone. When they finally separated, both breathless, they heard applause coming from the house. They turned to find not only Lily at the window, but also Lord Pemberton, the housekeeper, and at least half the household staff all observing with smiles ranging from sentimental to relieved. Finally, Lily's voice carried across the garden. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you in the same room. Jonathan laughed, the rich, genuine sound Rose had learned to love. Our daughter is very impatient. Our daughter? Rose tested the words, finding them perfectly fitting. Yes, she is. The wedding preparations became a source of unexpected division in London society. Lady Helena assumed the role of enthusiastic organizer, determined to make the event a statement about love transcending class. Guests were carefully selected, those who genuinely supported the union, or at least respected it enough to attend without causing trouble. Eleanor, Jonathan's ex-wife, sent a letter from the continent. Rose found it on Jonathan's desk one night, the seal already broken. His expression somber as he reread it. She will not come to the wedding, he said when Rose asked, but she sent her blessings, if we can call them that. She says she hopes I find the happiness we never could share, and that perhaps Rose will manage to love Lily in ways she failed to. It is something, I suppose. Rose sat beside him. Reconciliation does not happen all at once. Perhaps eventually she will find enough peace to truly know her own daughter. Your capacity for forgiveness never ceases to surprise me. I do not forgive easily, but holding a grudge would only hurt me. Eleanor made decisions based on her own weaknesses. I cannot change the past, but we can create a different future. The wedding took place in a private chapel on Lady Helena's estate, an intimate ceremony with only 50 guests. Rose wore an ivory-colored silk dress, simple in design but exquisitely made, a gift from Lady Helena, who had insisted on calling in the best seamstresses. Lily served as maid of honor, radiant in a light blue dress that matched her eyes. She held a basket of rose petals, scattering them down the aisle not by sight, but by a careful, oft-rehearsed counting of steps. As Rose walked down the aisle, there was no father to accompany her, but she did not feel alone. She could feel the support of those present, people who chose to celebrate love instead of judging it. And at the altar, Jonathan awaited with an expression that completely transformed his face. There were no more shadows there, only light. Hope. Love so evident that it made several guests discreetly touch their own moist eyes. The vows were traditional, ancient words about honoring and loving, in sickness and in health. But when it came time to exchange rings, Jonathan added something unrehearsed. Rose, promise not only to be my wife, but to continue being exactly who you are. Promise never to diminish your light to comfort those uncomfortable with its brilliance. Promise to challenge me when necessary and to support me always. Promise to love Lily, not as an obligation, but as a choice. I promise all of that. Her voice was clear, firm. And Jonathan, promise to be vulnerable with me when it is difficult. Promise to share not only joys but also fears. Promise that we will build a life together as true partners, not as protector and protected. I promise, always. The kiss that sealed their marriage was chaste compared to the one in the garden, appropriate for an audience. But it held the promise of thousands yet to come, a lifetime of stolen and shared moments. When they finally separated, both breathless, they heard applause coming from the house. They turned to find not only Lily at the window, but also Lord Pemberton, the housekeeper, and at least half the household staff, all observing with smiles ranging from sentimental to relieved. Finally, Lily's voice carried across the garden. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you in the same room. Jonathan laughed, the rich, genuine sound Rose had learned to love. Our daughter is very impatient. Our daughter. Rose tested the words, finding them perfectly fitting. Yes, she is. The reception was elegant but warm, combining necessary formality with genuine celebration. Rose danced first with Jonathan, then with Lord Pemberton, who insisted on personally thanking her for how she had transformed his granddaughter's life. Even Mr. Whitmore attended, bringing the entire cafe staff, all dressed in their best clothes and clearly delighted to be included. When the night finally ended and the guests departed, Jonathan and Rose remained alone in Lady Helena's gardens, watching the stars through a gap in the clouds. Frightened? He asked, his arm around her waist. Terrified, she admitted honestly, but also completely certain. Some things are worth the fear. We will be happy. It was not a question, but a declaration. Not perfect, not without challenges, but happy. Yes. Rose turned in his arms, her face lifted to his. Because happiness is not the absence of difficulties, but the presence of a love strong enough to face them. Years later, when Lily was 15 and beginning her own journey of navigating the world with surprising grace, she would ask Rose about that day at the cafe when it all began. Was it love at first sight? Lily would ask, now a confident young woman who had inherited Rose's compassion and Jonathan's determination. And Rose would answer honestly, it wasn't love at first sight. It was recognition of souls that needed each other. Love came later, built day by day, choice by choice. And that kind of love, the kind we consciously choose even when difficult, is the most enduring of all. Because in the end, it was not fortuitous circumstances that transformed a humble maid and a tormented magnate into a family. It was the courage to see beyond artificial barriers. It was kindness, persisting despite judgment. It was love, choosing hope over fear, connection over convention. And it was absolutely perfectly true.